This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the My Campaign Coach podcast. Today we're talking with conservative media strategist and social media consultant Gabby Hoffman. She graduated from UC San Diego in June 2012 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a minor in History. Gabby may have graduated in 2012, but her political resume goes much further back and is quite extensive. Her work's been mentioned everywhere from the Rush Limbaugh Show, Fox News, and the Drudge Report to places like the National Review and Politico. Gabby most recently served as the Director of Media Relations for the Liberty Farm Festival, and prior to that, she actually spent 4 years working as a regional field coordinator for the Leadership Institute, training candidates and activists in how to be effective and win. Gabby and I have been personal friends for a number of years, and I continue to learn a great deal from her and her experience both online and off. And her personal story is one that you need to hear, and she's got some great messaging and social media advice to share with us today. With that, Gabby, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Raz. Happy to talk about social media strategy and strategy in general.
Well, it's definitely something that our audience really needs to know more about. And I know as I've been launching My Campaign Coach and having to really dive a lot deeper and refresh a lot of my knowledge about social media and messaging strategy, I wanted to have you on just so you could give me some more tips, and as well as our audience. So it's both selfish and hopefully helpful to the folks listening.
Yeah, anything to increase awareness and to further educate people.
So give us a bit more background about your current political involvement and just your personal story.
Sure. Well, I, much like you and many of our other friends who've been entrenched in politics for a bit, I got my start almost a decade ago, about 7 years ago. I was one of those weird kids who was interested in politics from an early age. So I took the initiative to officially emerge in politics my freshman year of college at UC San Diego. And having come from a conservative background, it felt like a natural fit. And I noticed at my alma mater, there was a huge deficit in having a conservative perspective. Some of the other campuses, UCLA, UC Berkeley, the sister schools, already had some sort of conservative Republican presence. And UCSD was more ambivalent in terms of how it interacted with politics, although it was a pretty far left school. And I realized that there was a huge opportunity to get involved, so I decided to join the conservative paper upon entering college, and I wrote for that for my 3 years there, where I learned how to hone my skills and really become interested in messaging through the form of op-ed writing. And concurrently with writing, I started a Young Americans for Freedom chapter, and I hosted a pretty infamous lecture with David Horowitz, which became national news. And that was a pretty interesting turn of events on campus. And I got to see firsthand how hypersensitive and crazy the campus left can be. And I think those who tune into the podcast know that a lot of the campus leftists are far more energized and a lot more reactionary now than when we may have gone to college. I mean, 4 years is a pretty interesting time to see how much progression that they've become more radicalized from an already given radicalized nature. From that event, I was able to really get my start in politics. So concurrently with my studies, I worked on radio for the Rick Amato Show. It's not operating anymore, but it was a pretty well-listened program in the San Diego area for the time it was on. And I really liked helping my former boss at the time kind of boost his profile and elevate his presence in the area in the SoCal region. And not only did I book guests with such luminaries like Michelle Malkin and S.E. Cupp, I also produced my own segment as I got more involved, and I was able to garner their trust and their confidence in me. And so I was able to not only book guests while in an assistant position, I was also able to have a leadership role in the radio show with producing a segment. So that was really cool, helping to elevate young conservatives. So I got my interest in helping our fellow young conservatives and libertarians early on through that experience. And I also was involved with a lot of local San Diego Tea Parties and with the local Eagle Forum chapter. And so after following graduation and having done all this stuff, I was wanting to go into a career in journalism. I did an internship at Media Research Center, loved it, but I realized journalism wasn't the path for me. Although I am very media savvy and interested in trends and following up with the news, through the experience, I garnered through interning there and then eventually going to Leadership Institute and completing my tenure there, I realized that not only can you have a impact in media without being directly in the news cycle, there are many ways to garner media attention, positive earned media, and many other ways to be involved in that sector. So I realized from then that I could do media consulting, whether it was traditional means through print or TV and radio, or through new means or new media through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other digital platforms. And so through years, you learn kind of what you want to do. You pick and sift what your interest areas are. And through all these experiences I've had, I was able to realize like my role as an activist and as a conservative is to help people get coached in the right skills in order to become good communicators and better communicators. And using the experiences I've had through writing myself, doing radio interviews, and being an activist, and having, I guess, a big digital profile, especially on Twitter, I wanted to take the stuff that I learned and applied to my own messaging to clients and to other activists who are up and coming, and also to those who are not necessarily in politics but apply conservative values to day-to-day operations, small businesses, or hunting and fishing outfitters. So I know that was probably a lot, but there was a whole natural progression as to how I got here, trial and error like we all go through, and I'm happy to be where I am, and I like helping people and have been unofficially for a few months. But yeah, since I launched my business, it's been more official in the last few weeks. But it's something, that you're going to learn to do better, and I'm excited for the challenges and further helping people in my independent capacity now.
Well, congratulations on getting launched, because Gabby just launched her own business just a couple weeks ago. And that's part of why I reached out to you to get on this podcast, is I saw that come live, and it really excited me to see these kinds of products and services and training out there available to everybody from campaigns to fishing and hunting folks. Tell us a little bit more about that other side, kind of the fishing and outdoorsman side of your work and of the fun side of your personality there.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to elaborate. It's kind of foreign here that women are involved in the outdoor industry. It doesn't take away from our femininity, but I would say it's a personal interest for me to help those in the shooting sports and fishing industry, and also those in the firearms industry. Having been exposed to the outdoor lifestyle since I was a little girl, I first got hooked into it, I guess pun intended, through fishing when I was about 8 or 10, and then I really got into it when I was 12. And when I moved away from California, I had more opportunities to explore firearms, because California has very high restrictions. And unless you go to the wilderness or go shooting in the backwoods in California mountains, it's very hard to learn about firearms in any capacity, because the ranges are not in really open view. It's very expensive to test firearms, to learn about it, to buy equipment, to buy gear. And so moving to Virginia sort of opened my eyes more so to the possibilities and the realities behind basic firearms ownership. So after fishing, then came firearms instructions and proper handling of that. So I'm a gun owner, and I am also a concealed handgun permit holder as well. And my next foray is into hunting. And I'm going to be going on my first hunting trip next month, I believe, duck hunting somewhere here in the Northern Virginia area, I believe on private land, because Virginia has a lot of private land versus public lands access. So that'll be very interesting. But given my own interest in it, interacting with people in the industry, I've gone to such places like SHOT Show, I've gone to NRA annual meetings, and through my political work, I've also encountered a lot of people, and probably much like you and anyone else listening, we've interacted with a lot of these small business owners in the shooting sports, firearms, hunting and fishing industry. And a lot of them do share our values, even if they're not explicitly involved in the political process. And perhaps this election cycle, a lot of people who are normally more reserved or do identify with our values woke up and spoke out and got involved because they felt like their rights were being jeopardized, and rightfully so. So we saw a lot of people in this industry that is closely tied with conservative politics come out in droves in support of Donald Trump, and even those on the down ballot ticket races, I think because they felt that Hillary Clinton posed a serious threat to hunting and fishing rights, which she did, because she's for cutting back on certain rights, and she would have cut off a lot of fishing access too. A lot of Democrats believe that if you section off thinks it's going to be great for the environment, but not only is it deleterious to the environment, it's also deleterious to businesses and those who provide such products as fish for consumption and for sale. And so kind of noticing the burdens that they encounter and the roadblocks to them launching their business and any restrictions they may have in place, like there's a commonality with that. And it's an ever-growing industry, and it's worth billions upon billions of dollars in terms of revenue. And these people are such great people who want to educate people about proper safety measures through any of these sectors. And they're nice and they contribute to the economy. And the fact that a large number of them have been ignored or don't have the tools, the digital tools, especially to become more effective in their messaging, that's a deficit that I noticed and that I want to help remedy with whatever I can offer to them. There are some brands out there that are really good in their marketing, like Yeti, Salt Life, Bass Pro Shop, the Outdoor Channel. So there are good players. The bigger kind of corporate organizations and the larger brands tend to do very well, but the smaller up and coming brands have much to catch up on. And so I want to do my part as a media consultant and strategist to help those smaller companies kind of measure up to the bigger guys, but to compete, friendly competition, to have friendly competition with them and work in concert with other hunting and fishing outfitters. So given my personal interest in having lived the lifestyle and living the lifestyle of going to the outdoors and recognizing the small business interests they have, I wanted to tackle that niche and also parallel it with my political efforts too. And so I think more conservatives have to apply their principles to real life scenarios and to those who are actually trying to put our values into place of small business, of self-determination, of independence, of self-sufficiency. And so we have to look for partners in other sectors that largely mirror ours to help them, bolster them, and to make sure that they succeed. So I'm going to do my part to help those fishing and hunting outfitters as well.
I really love that. I've been hunting and fishing and shooting my whole life, and especially it's been cool to see how the internet has really allowed so many different, much smaller businesses in those industries pop up, and it's really cool to see you work with them to make sure they have the resources they need to be able to go out there and get those products out there and protect their rights as well. Now, one of the most important things that I really like about your story is looking at your motivation and kind of how you got started and your family's immigration story and their experience with communism. Tell us a little bit more about that and how it has got you in this fight.
Well, I like to say that conservatism flows in my bloodstream, given my family history. My parents came here about 30 years ago, fleeing then Soviet-occupied Lithuania. Today, it's thankfully a free country and actually one of the most prosperous countries, even more free market than the United States, oddly enough, according to recent studies. And so having lived in a country that was deprived of its basic rights and opportunities, my parents hated seeing their ancestral homeland brutalized by these crazy statist policies of government control of certain agencies, property, lack of religion, and very few opportunities afforded to people unless you were part of the upper echelons of government. So they had a desire to come to this country, and conservatism basically was passed down to my sister and I, and that's naturally how it would be if your parents fled such a place like that where freedom was limited and opportunities to flourish were non-existent. And hearing the stories of my grandparents, I would say they were more so adversely impacted. My parents had endured a lot of restrictions. Whether it was institutional restrictions or barriers to certain opportunities given their religious or ethnic background, because the Soviet Union persecuted even Christian minorities like Catholics and even those who were Jewish. So they were equal opportunity offenders and oppressors. But my grandparents had an even harsher time behind the Iron Curtain. My maternal grandfather was in a gulag for 18 months. And it was amazing that he was able to survive such harsh conditions. And he was scarred for life. And when you have those real world examples of your relatives suffering under big government policies and having your parents live through a system, thankfully post-Stalinist era, but having seen what goes on, even from a socialistic perspective, they lived under socialism essentially. but seeing, what my family endured under Stalin, and then post-Stalin, still communist with Khrushchev, and then Boris Yeltsin and all those other dictators. So just seeing those family examples, I was able to learn how to apply the value of the dollar, how to support free markets, how to encourage religious liberty, and pursue self-reliance through my family experience. And so there's a lot that can be said, but I learned directly from my parents. It wasn't mere brainwashing. I've studied multiple views. I've been exposed to multiple views, but I would say my conservative views were reaffirmed every time I would be in a liberal environment, whether it was college, high school, or even living in the DC area. And so my parents were largely correct. I never doubted them for a bit, but I wanted to reassure that I can affirm my views. And my parents know a lot of the disaster that is in big government because they lived through a society like that. And I want to do my best to not replicate that here in the United States. And through my activism and through my work, I've been able to help shed a little light on the consequences of statism and big government policies using my family experiences. And some people discount that as, well, it's red baiting, or this is so extreme that you say this. Like, our policies, a lot of leftists will say our policies are not as harsh as like those in the Soviet Union, or they try to discount it. But it has, their ideas do have the potential, sadly, to create ruin. Big ruin and equality of misery for all. And so it's just, you have to educate people about history and remind them that when government gets too powerful, a lot of harm can be done. And so I use whatever platform I have to showcase that. And so far, I guess it's been successful, even despite the naysayers. But I use my family history to show not only can people come to this country and succeed, people can realize their human potential in a free market society.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think that it's really important that you keep telling that story, and I'd highly encourage that, because as we get further and further from the fall of Soviet communism, there's fewer and fewer people that have that, and especially for people that immigrated to this country and have that direct connection to that history of oppression, for them to keep telling that and reminding us as we have a higher education system that is friendly, if not loving towards it. And we have so few people. I mean, even myself, I was just a couple years old when the wall fell, and we're getting further and further distant from that. And even while we may have experienced a lot of the terror, the war on terror, we don't remember. And as far as our short-term memory doesn't allow us to hold on to much of that fear of the Soviet Russians, as well as the oppression that the indigenous peoples there faced. No, that's right. Critically important. So keep telling that story every chance you get.
I will, absolutely.
So moving on to what you're doing in your new venture, what kind of products and services do you offer to help as a media strategist and a consultant, and what kind of clients do you work with?
Sure. On my website, you can find that I have 3 primary services, but I try to cater to about 6 different niche areas. But my primary services are media relations, which include helping people draft op-eds or get their op-eds placed into prominent publications. If people need help with issuing press releases or developing press contact lists, or finding out who locally or who in their state would be best serve them to cover their events or their campaigns or initiatives, I like helping people, and I want to offer those services in terms of being effective in issuing press releases and contact with the press. And also, if I can, and if there's an interest, to use the connections I have in radio and TV and other mainstream media outlets to help people get strategically placed onto those outlets. A second component is social media strategy. And I don't want to simply help people post on social media. I want to equip people with the skills to post effectively on social media, whether that's helping them create their content strategy using advertising tools to boost certain posts, and also helping people orchestrate their online campaigns if they have a call to action of some sort. So equipping people with the right tools to promote their ideas effectively over social media. And then a third large component is offering trainings, customized trainings to people, whether it's through social media lectures, strategy sessions, or myself talking on a panel or at a conference about the importance of the intersection of digital tools, millennial perspectives, and social media strategy. So kind of offering a wide swath of services to those who may be interested, and and at a reasonable cost too, because a lot of consultants will offer services at these astronomically high prices, and they make money and they may not necessarily get the job done. So I only not want to offer a quality product, but I want to help people get higher return on their investment for their investment in consulting services that I offer. I tell my clients, like, I can't guarantee you this set amount of followers, this potential revenue, but I can guarantee that you have a strategy in place to execute your mission and your message well, and then that can eventually turn into higher dividends. So I try to offer a wide swath of services to help people and kind of cater to whatever needs they have, not simply just tell them you need to do this, but let them pick and choose what services they want to help their messaging efforts become better.
Well, we share the same worldview as far as making it affordable, making it effective, and trying to make sure that we're giving a reasonable assessment of what we can guarantee versus what we're going to work for. And that's something that far too few consultants actually do. They try to sell you the moon, and you pay for it, and then what you get after the fact is oftentimes quite questionable. Now, shifting over a little bit to the campaign side of things, what are the top attributes that you look for when analyzing a campaign, sort of indicators that you have an idea it's a healthy campaign or needs serious help?
A lot of the times to measure a successful campaign, and you don't have to necessarily be involved in the process. You can be an observer if you're involved in politics, of course. But if someone does not have a content strategy in place, if they're not using social media effectively, if they're not putting out a good message, and if they're always having to be on the defensive, those are some pretty stark warning signs that can measure a health of a campaign. So for instance, I would say when Senator Ted Cruz was elected in 2012 to the U.S. Senate, he had a lot of the right stuff in place. Like, he was very effective on social media, and one of our mutual friends is responsible for that, and he understands the senator's voice very well. So it's also personnel as policy. So Senator Cruz hired a very good social media manager to help communicate his voice. He put out visually appealing graphics, used modern tools, came off very relatable, had a good story to tell. We were all familiar with his similar anti-communist background story like what I have, and he was able to tell his story, drum that up, and get people to recognize that he's conservative largely because of his family history, and that his mission to advance liberty-minded ideas came from his upbringing and his father's story. And so Senator Cruz had a very compelling story to tell, and that largely won over a lot of Texas voters for there. And so he had the digital game in place, he had the great story, and he seemed very approachable and easy to work with, and even approachable for media. I think even his most, those who kind of revile him or may not even like him still respect him, because he's open to the media, he treats them with respect, and he communicates his perspective well. So kind of what I talked about going into what I look for in clients, I think Senator Cruz succeeded so much because he had the right infrastructure in place and has the personality to be a successful politician, and was also very relatable to his constituency and to also those who are not in his direct constituency as well. But those are three important things to look for. If someone is open to articulating conservatism, even to mainstream sources, has a digital infrastructure in place, and can tell a compelling story without diluting conservative values, that's what largely can go into a successful campaign. And there's no, I would say it's very different for every campaign. Largely, Trump's campaign was very unorthodox. He didn't necessarily follow that template. He certainly had a compelling story to tell, although more brash, but he was able to break it down in relatable terms to people who don't take well or who don't know policy very well, and was able to communicate that in simple terms to them, and spoke largely to them. And while his digital efforts may have been lacking, he may not have placed a lot of money into it, somehow his message was able to resonate because people were just tired of the status quo. So every elected official is very different, or every campaign is different.
One of the things that was pointed out to me by a friend, and that I realized about the difference between Trump and Clinton's campaigns, was that if you ask anybody, what is Donald Trump going to do? Everybody could tell you, make America great again. Whereas with Hillary, there was no clear response. And her message was different everywhere she went. It was very scattered, and it was largely focused on being not Donald Trump. And that fundamentally, that message focus, defining who you are, is critical. What are some of the things that candidates should do as they're building that media strategy, making sure they define themselves, trying to stay on the offense rather than the defense? What's kind of a checklist or some of the major components that they need to make sure that they have in place?
Sure. Well, before hiring a digital consultant or even a social media manager, you have to first craft your content strategy. You have to identify the who, what, where, and why. You have to develop your mission or your message early on, have maybe 3 to 4 bullet points of what you believe in. You can have more, but if you want to develop a primary focus, you have to have 3 or 4 points early on, defining who you are, and set yourself early on, going on the offensive with who you are, defining yourself before your opponents define you. So developing your content strategy, and you can use certain tools like Hootsuite, Buffer, HubSpot, and these marketing blogs, I will say, are very great resources to help you channel and hone in on how to develop your content strategy. So you have to develop your message early on so people know concretely where you stand, how you'll articulate your views, and what you believe in. So if you have that laid out from there, it'll be very easy to construct your social media campaign or any digital campaign. And so once you have your ideas formulated and on paper, whether it's in print or on your computer, but once you've nailed down your strategy and what you want to promote, then you can apply the tools to promote your strategy, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email marketing, paid advertising, Facebook Live or live video streaming options, whatever. But it's important to have your strategy, and then you can go on to use or apply the tools to grow your message there. And also it's helpful to have people and especially develop relations with bloggers and other digital influencers, in addition to having the tools in place. Coupling your digital strategy with influencers is also extremely important. So finding like-minded people or elected officials who can help bolster your efforts is extremely important. And then once you kind of have those 3 things in place, you can invest in certain additional tools like paid advertising to grow your presence even more if you're having trouble doing it organically. But I think if you have a right message, you have the tools in place, and you have the influencers propping you up or more prominent elected officials propping your campaign, you're going to be able to grow your presence more effectively, I would say. So it's having your content strategy, it's then using the right digital tools to promote your message, and then honing in on that by having digital influencers and other influencers and even potential constituents or campaign field directors propping you up, promoting the message, using those digital tools as well to help grow the grassroots army and also grow the digital message.
Yeah, those 2 points that you brought up, I really love. The first is that the content strategy has to be a direct outgrowth of your overall message. And we actually just posted a blog article on the My Campaign Coach website today talking about 7 questions that you have to answer before you run for office. And we kind of walk people through how they need to answer those questions and what the kind of consideration they need to take. And I'll post a link in the show notes to that. But second of all was the idea of using influencers and bloggers to really energize your campaign and help you from getting your word out. And you mentioned Ted Cruz and his Senate campaign in 2012. He actually launched his campaign. His first campaign announcement took place in a blogger call. He had a couple hundred bloggers that they had built relationships with, and that Josh Perry, his social media manager, had built relationships with. And that was how they launched the campaign. And those relationships were critical to his success there in 2012.
Yeah, it's he certainly had the perfect model for it, and sometimes it may work for people and they sadly lose because depending upon the state they live in, they may not have enough of like-minded voters or voters that they appeal to, or they only realize their content strategy and have everything in line towards the end. They don't develop it early, but Senator Cruz certainly developed it very early on, I think 2 years before the race, at least a year and a half. And so that gave him ample amount of time to define himself, to set himself apart even from his Republican challengers, and essentially go on to defeat the Democrat challenger back in 2012. So when you have, much like what he did, in place, an infrastructure, the content messaging strategy, the digital tools, and the influencers to back you up, you can succeed. And there's obviously far more parts in between, because you'll have to do press releases. You'll have to use traditional means to also bolster candidates. But I think if you have, you can use new media for minimal cost to really craft your message and get your messaging out there, even well before you invest in other options that are needed in campaigns. But you can do that for low cost and have huge dividends with far reach, a larger amount of impressions on your social accounts, and essentially reach wider audiences if you develop that kind of brand behind a campaign.
So a lot of the folks that are listening are campaign managers or candidates, potential candidates they're trying to get their campaign started and build their plan for running this next cycle. And so at this point, let's assume they've got their general message constructed. They know why they're running, what they're running for, why voters should pick them. And they've kind of figured out a little bit of their message strategy that social media is going to play heavily in that. How should they approach building their social media strategy specifically? Where should they be on? And what kind of tools should they use to really magnify that impact?
It depends largely on the scope and scale of the campaign. If you're running for a local statewide office, if you're running for a state senate or a state rep, the tools you may need may vastly differ from what a more national campaign would need. So for instance, for a more national campaign, it's very essential to have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can choose to have Snapchat and some other tools, but I would stick with 3 or 4 primary social media outlets available to you. And then within those social media platforms, you're going to be able to use embedded video features, Facebook Live, or even just a simple video creation feature. So a lot of those tools allow you to be creative with your messaging in terms of how you disseminate. You can post a picture, you can post a video, you can post a live stream, you can post a regular conventional post. But I would say stick with maybe Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then if you want to use Snapchat, that largely appeals to young people. I know some of our favorite politicians do use Snapchat. So you can decide whether or not you want to add more beyond those 3 that I mentioned, but those 3 will certainly come in play because they have the most followers. And I would say actually that Instagram continues to grow at an exponential rate, and as does Snapchat. More visually appealing apps are coming into the forefront. So candidates should invest time in all 3, if not all 4 of them. And for smaller campaigns, if you're not comfortable with an Instagram, you don't necessarily have to choose it. But if you're running for, let's say, like governor or lieutenant governor or attorney general, you can still use those 3 primary social media platforms and expand to Snapchat and others beyond. Pinterest if you want, but that's sadly becoming more obsolete, and it's more so for the housewives. Or for women who are very interested in food and decoration and stuff. And it's not a bad thing. I know guys have an interest in Pinterest too, but you can't really apply Pinterest to campaigns. But I would say those 3 or 4 social media applications will endure even as more platforms come out and more applications come out in the future. But certainly those 4 are important. And then for smaller campaigns or lesser scale campaigns, just have the basic Facebook and Twitter, and Instagram could be optional if you're running for a local race. Or if you think if you live in a big, heavily urban district and you're running for local office, it doesn't hurt to have a visually appealing application like Instagram. So it's obviously according to taste, but I would say a combination of any of those 3 or 4, however to people's likings. But certainly you do need at least Facebook and Twitter so you can reach out to voters and potential constituents.
What kind of tools should campaigns use to manage that? I know that as far as creating the graphics and very shareable images, I've used stuff from Adobe Elements to Canva. What kind of stuff from the management side, both as far as posting and scheduling and creation, what all do you recommend folks use?
Yeah, well, certainly if you are adept at photo editing, invest in the Adobe programs with the Lightroom, Photoshop, etc., and hire someone who knows how to do that. That's something I wish I could learn more so. My sister is more adept at that, and I know how to do basic stuff like Canva. So there are free options that don't entail so much grunt or grit, I would say, going into creating. But if you would like very highly specialized graphics, then certainly invest in options like Adobe and cheaper options like Canva. It depends on how much you want to invest in graphics. But you don't necessarily need to have that in place. But you can explore both and see what you like. And there are alternatives to Photoshop that are cheaper, so you can look into those as well. And I'd be happy to give the names of those at a later point. But in terms of social media management tools, there are many out there available. I like using a combination of Hootsuite and Buffer for my clients, especially Hootsuite, because it allows you to tag accounts if you're trying to reference articles or certain people or individuals. And Buffer, though, allows you to have control over more of your social media accounts. Hootsuite is more limited in terms of their free packages, and Buffer allows you more access through the free option. But those dashboards offer both free options and paid options, and even their paid options are fairly reasonable for a monthly rate. There are other options like Social Sprout. That's also another popular tool to manage social media, and there's a whole host of them. But I think those three are very important. So if you don't have much of funds available to you, look for those free options in all those dashboard management applications. And then just simply referencing, if you want to learn how to effectively manage, if you can't afford to hire a consultant, read up on HubSpot, Digiday, the Hootsuite blogs, the Buffer blogs, Social Media Examiner. Like, there are a lot of free resources available where you can read from industry experts in public relations, simply at the availability of your computer or even your smartphone. And so I stay tuned with the latest trends through a combination of all those resources. I'm subscribed to their newsletters. I read their blogs. I look at their Facebook posts. So it's important to seek out those free available resources, or at least get familiar with them, and maybe even invest in their paid services later on if you like them. But there are so many avenues available to campaign consultants, to campaigns, through these excellent blogs. I cannot stress that enough. Our side doesn't take advantage of these dashboards or these marketing platforms as much as they should. I know the left has an upper hand, so we need to do our best to catch up with them, if not overtake them in this avenue. But there are a lot of free resources, and you'll learn a lot and be able to apply those to your social media strategy and content strategy in general.
Yeah, there's just so many cool tools out there. There's different ones for everybody if you can find one that just fits you. But I use Buffer a lot, and I've used Hootsuite in the past, and it's a great tool for posting across a number of different social channels. One of the cool things that I just found out about is that Adobe Elements, the replacement, the subscription service that they're offering instead of the Photoshop downloads, is you can actually get that for like $50 a month for your first year. And that gives you access to every single one, from video editing to photos to Illustrator across the line. So I think I'm actually going to probably switch from Canva over to that, just to give us a little bit more bandwidth as far as what the platforms we can play with are. Because I'm having to get a whole lot more adept at a lot of the content creation side as we're going through the motions with Campaign Sidekick and getting more of our blog and podcast and video stuff up there.
No, it doesn't hurt, and I'm gonna try my best. Like, I took some trainings on Adobe, and I do like the photo editing components to it. Like, it's and I've created some graphics with a Photoshop substitute before. So I think even if we're like scared to do it, I think us consultants should try, or at least be familiar with it. My sister loves that kind of stuff, so I'm gonna rely upon her expertise to teach me. But she invested in that deal. I think she paid either $40 a month or $40 for the year. She got some very cool discount recently for Photoshop. So consultants and those interested, there are deals right now to get Adobe for really, really cheap. So it's important to look into those and study those. And you can take online webinars on the program and learn even as simply from YouTube as to how to create great graphics.
I've learned so much via YouTube in the last few weeks, because I've been having to learn how to do all this podcast editing and doing my videos and all that, and everything from lighting to podcast production to everything. It's just so amazing, all the tutorials and stuff that are out there. When it comes to a lot of those blogs you mentioned, it can be really daunting for folks to think about, I got to bookmark all these sites and I got to go back and visit them every day. But what I use and what I recommend is a tool like Feedly or something like that, where you just plug in the RSS feeds and you check that a couple times a week or however often you get to. They've pulled all the articles for you. It's really nice and easy to read, like a magazine. And it saves a ton of time when it comes to digesting all those different articles.
Very true. Very, very true.
So Gabby, as we're kind of closing out, I really appreciate being here with us today. What has you most excited about your work? You just started a small business. You're helping campaigns and brands and really trying to advance conservatism in America. What excites you the most about kind of where you're at and where you're headed?
Well, I'm excited I'm trying to kind of diversify my clientele a bit. Like, I don't want to be fully engrossed in politics. I would say a third of my attention is going to be on politics, a third on the outdoor industry, and then another third on small business. And small business can have an overlap of those two areas. But I'm really excited to help state lawmakers, especially those who have conservative and libertarian leanings, because they often get ignored in the stream of things. And I want to help them get more attention because what happens locally can even have a far greater impact than what happens nationally. And we feel the more direct consequences of what goes on legislatively in our states than I would say what goes on nationally. It will take probably 2 years for a law to go into effect nationally. But we usually feel the impact of laws as soon as a few months or even upon immediate implementation. And so state lawmakers are highly undervalued, and they desire to become better messengers, and they're probably the most open-minded to learning how to become more effective content creators, effective messengers. So I'm going to be piloting a training helping them craft their content strategy. And I have a few states I'll be going to. And so I'm really excited to unveil that project and work with them. I'm also very excited to work with outdoor clients and shooting sports clients because there are so many of them, and the sphere is just ever growing, and there are more businesses coming about, and they want to have a piece of the pie, of the marketing pie or the exposure pie. And so working with them to either establish their social media strategy or helping them respond to any negative attacks they may have with a media campaign, or even just them going on the offensive or even responding to policy. I want to make myself available for them so they're on top of stuff. They can grow their brand simultaneously and allowing them to impact their communities and their states more locally as well. So I'm looking forward to helping them because they want to better apply the values that we espouse in politics to their work.
I love it. Well, Gabby, I'm really excited about what you're doing and the new business you've launched. Where can folks find you online and sign up for your newsletter and see how you can help their campaigns or their organizations? Absolutely.
Well, my newsletter, I have an email sign-up list, and you feel free to pass that along to people. But you can go to my website, GabriellaHoffman.com, and on the right sidebar, you'll find the email newsletter sign-up form there if you don't have the social media one available. But it's right there on my website on the right-hand side, I think on my blog section. So feel free to sign up there. My newsletter is free, and every week, every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I put out a newsletter talking about, let's say, if it's a holiday season. So I generally begin with what's kind of generally going on, offer well wishes, something positive, and then I go into the discussion of the latest digital trends, what may be happening in the outdoor shooting sports realm, and then political or general news people may have missed. So I'm making it's a fun, inviting format, and I want people to enjoy reading their emails again. And people can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook as Gabriella Hoffman. I have a public page as well, so people can go there and connect with me there. I'm also on Twitter at Gabby_Hoffman. And I also direct people to my Instagram account, which is Gabriella_Hoffman. I'm trying to be more active there, and I really like the storytelling component of it. And so feel free to connect on all those platforms. Shoot me an email at Gabriellahoffman.com. That goes directly to my website, and I can answer any inquiries you have. But my hope is that my social accounts can foster more dialogue, greater connections, and further networking with people.
That's perfect. Yeah. Also, check out what Gabby's been writing at The Resurgent, theresurgent.com, our friend Eric Erickson's website that we both write for over there. Got some great stuff there. I subscribed to Gabby's email list when it first popped up, and I saw she was launching on Facebook, and it's been fantastic. We got 2 weeks out so far. I got to catch up from when I was in Mexico and didn't get to read it, but I'm looking forward to those weekly updates because it's really good. Gabby, thank you so much for being on with us today. I really appreciate it, and I think folks will get a lot of great information. We're going to be having all the different links and everything that Gabby talked about, from the blog she recommends follows to the different tools and her content information and where you can find her online, all in the show notes. So make sure you check that out. Please don't forget to check us out on iTunes and review us and rate us on there. That does a lot to help us spread the word. And once again, Gabby, thank you so much. Talk to y'all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.